this gentleman right here is the author of this book. It's called Listen Liberal. And if you read this book, it will make you a radical. So be careful if you read this book. If you read this book, you will now become a woke Democratic participant. You will now no longer support criminals in your government. If you read this book, it's going to make a lot of people not like you anymore. If you read this book, you're going to be called a lot of names. If you read this book, you are definitely going to be called a radical. So I recommend you get this book by Thomas Frank. That guy's a radical. That guy is outside the mainstream. Look at him. That guy, that's the new face of the radical. Historians. Historians are now radicals. People who are evidence-based journalists are now radicals in America. And I'm glad to have a radical like Thomas Frank on my show. Thank you so much. Okay, and it's my pleasure to have with us today the author of Listen Liberal. It is Thomas Frank. Now, he also wrote the book, What's the Matter with Kansas, which was widely talked about. There was a time I couldn't turn on cable news without seeing him talking about it and everybody else talking about it. Listen Liberal, for some reason, I don't know what it is. Maybe he can tell us. I'm not seeing him as much in the mainstream news media as I used to. So let me first welcome our esteemed guest, Thomas Frank. How are you, Thomas?
Hey, I'm good. I feel, it's funny that you bring that up. I feel, not only do I feel great, but I feel better than I did back in Kansas days.
Oh, really? You mean physically you feel better?
In every respect. Did
you cut out dairy?
I think I'm better at the game now than I was then.
Oh, okay. I hear what you're saying. Okay. So what now, would you agree with my assessment that you were received much more warmly by the media over What's the Matter with Kansas than you are with Listen Liberal?
Well, at first the media really hated What's the Matter with Kansas because they thought it was inappropriate, to give a book that title, to go after, certain political figures in the way that I did. This is in 2004, remember. This was one of the first books to really attack the conservative movement in that particular way, and that was new. And there was a lot of anger, But this one, the response. I'm not complaining, by the way. Listen Liberal is the book is selling, and I'm happy. But the mainstream, there's very little interest in it at all from the mainstream American media. Now, I'm on TV in foreign countries all the time. They're very interested in this because you see this is happening all over the world. What's just happened here. They're very curious about it. But no, our own media in this country, this is how can I put it? Critiquing the Democratic Party in the way that I did is not acceptable to them. It's not something you're permitted to do, even if it's all accurate and true, and it is. I didn't make it up; it's all true,
So what did, for instance, what did Rachel Maddow say to you about this book when she interviewed you about it?
She didn't. Nothing.
Oh, you're kidding. She didn't interview you? That is so weird because she's the leading liberal voice and a Rhodes Scholar. You'd think she would have the #1 writer who's a New York Times bestselling author who critiqued the Democratic Party. She'd probably have him on every week from somewhere to talk about something that's, especially right now in this tumultuous time where the Democratic Party is going through their autopsy right now. The autopsy of what went wrong, and it turned out what went wrong was Russia.
Oh no! Okay, I missed that. So that I didn't write about that. Lots of people doing autopsies about the election, and no, by and large, I'm not invited to participate in those. There's no interest in that.
No interest in an actual autopsy, correct?
Well, in the kind of criticism that I'm that I do, no, there's no interest in. No. But what you just said, people are very keen to talk about how. The Russians conspired to deprive Hillary of her rightful seat at the throne, or whatever it is, Comey, you can go down the list. They come up with all sorts of different excuses. These are in the realm of excuses, though. What I'm talking about is a long-term direction that the Democratic Party is going in. That's something. No, they're not interested. No, nobody's interested in that in this country. In other countries, they're very interested in it.
So the people in this country I've found out who are actually interested in that kind of critique that you're talking about are immediately smeared as being Kremlin sympathizers or Trump supporters, which is what I have been called and what Glenn Greenwald have been called and David Sirota and Jordan Chariton. You know, anybody who's actually doing actual critiques of what's actually wrong with our system of this neoliberal corporatism in America gets smeared as a Trump supporter or a Kremlin advocate or a dupe. Are you seeing that happen too?
Well, none of that's happened to me, but that's probably because I always, take pains to tell people that, I'm not a Trump supporter. I always make that clear. So I've never had someone make that mistake with me.
You're lucky.
But I can see. I can see that happening to other people, but it's probably because I'm not part of the conversation in the way that you are. You're out there all the time.
Yes, I'm out there. It's happened to me, Robert Scheer, Chris Hedges, Glenn Greenwald, Jordan Chariton. It's a very small group of progressive news media, so we all know each other. And now I'm going to bring you into it, and you're going to get called names. I'm sorry, you're going to be called names.
No,
so get ready for it.
That's cool. So Bob Scheer is one of my heroes, by the way. I was just out there in Los Angeles before the election, and we did an event together. And Glenn Greenwald, I'm a great admirer of his. I think he's awesome.
Yes, I'm also a big fan of Robert Scheer. I was at that event. That's where I got this book. And, it's no coincidence that you're already appearing to be even redder in your skin tone on this. So you are going to be called a commie. Believe me, you're going to be red baited because you're already sunburned.
I know. I'm really sorry. I'm almost purple. I can see it. It looks like I don't know what the hell is going on.
So the first paragraph says, liberals like to believe that if only Democrats can continue to dominate national elections, if only those awful Republicans are beaten into submission, then the country will be on the right track. Unfortunately, this view fundamentally misunderstands the modern Democratic Party. Explain to me what you mean by that.
That it's look, it's all self-evident now. That was written. The book was published in March. This is like 8 months ago, right, or 10 months ago, or whatever. It was published a long time ago, and I was at the time trying to persuade Democrats that their strategy for winning elections wasn't necessary. I mean, it almost seems like a waste of time to talk about it now, but I was trying to persuade them that their strategy for winning national elections was not necessarily a good one. If you only focus on the presidential election and you figure you've got it in the bag no matter what all the time, it's going to lead to all sorts of, just in tactical terms here, to complacency. Which you saw in spades in the Hillary Clinton campaign. These are people that just could not get excited about anything. The sort of unofficial slogan of the campaign was "America is already great." This is it's just a recipe for putting people to sleep. They were just completely out of touch with discontent. And you can't have a left party that's just so in such an in-your-face way, a party of the affluent, and the well-to-do, and of the contented, that doesn't work. It'll work from time to time, but these guys think. By the way, Jimmy, did I tell you I live here in the suburbs of Washington D.C. And so I spend a lot of time around these people. That's where all of this comes from. And when I wrote this book, there's a lot of things that made me write it, but one of them was sitting there and listening to somebody explain to me the theory of what they call the coalition of the Ascendant. You remember this?
Yes.
And this is basically the idea that Democrats could never lose national elections from here on, from here to eternity. They could never lose, and so therefore they didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to serve anybody. They didn't have to do anything different. And the only people that they had to do favors for were, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, Big Pharma. This is who they had. This was that was the swing vote of American politics. That was the groups that they had to reach out to, were these particular industries. And you saw this with Hillary's campaign, where who was the group she was after? She was trying to win over. It's suburban, highly educated Republicans. you know, well, that didn't work. But it's look, at the end of the day, we have this. I don't particularly like the two-party system. You've read the book, so you know that I kind of hate the two-party system, but that's what we've got. And the Democrats are the left party in that system. And for a left party to, to do these things and to make itself into a voice of the contented, the voice of the affluent, the voice of the professional class, you can pull that off for a short amount of time, but in the long term, that's disaster. We just saw it. She lost to a man who had no business running for president.
You are correct. So I want to start at the beginning. What if people actually knew what Bill Clinton and Barack Obama actually did instead of what they think they did, or how those two guys made people feel inside, that they would be screaming bloody murder, which is what I've been doing ever since I read your book. And before, I've been doing this for quite a while. And then I read your book, and I actually have to stop reading it for long periods of time because it would make me too angry. And if I would come in to do a show, I would be spitting nails. Or if I went to the Young Turks and went on air, I would give somebody a dressing down, and it would cause problems. I'm not kidding. So reading
I'm sorry, I apologize for that.
Reading,
I mean, look, I was doing my best to describe my own. I'm like in my 50s now, and I'm trying to describe my frustration with this party, as the years go by. And I'm just going to repeat some of the stuff I've seen you say. You've talked about how neoliberalism, capitalism is collapsing all over the world. This is true to a certain degree. They just went through this the system just went through this incredible crisis. And it's, we've come out the other end, but like in what kind of condition, it's not good. Inequality gets worse all the time. And, and we've got this, left party in America that can't seem to, well, look, I'm talking in way too broad strokes here. We should come down to particulars, because you just said something very important. If people knew what Clinton and Obama actually did, the actual policies of these guys, rather than think about them in these hazy. Yeah, you're exactly right. It would make you very angry, very angry. And can I take a step back here? When I'm writing this book, I did not read any of the Bill Clinton hate literature. Like in the 90s, there are all these books put out by right wingers about how he, they accused him of murder, they accused him of running drugs, they accused him of ridiculous things, and I didn't touch any of that stuff. My critique of Bill Clinton all derives from books and journalism by his supporters and by his admirers. That's what I used. Yes. And same with Obama. That was the only way to be fair to these guys, I thought.
So let's start with Bill Clinton. So what happened was Ronald Reagan was very popular. He started the beginning of the end for unions, middle class, and workers in America. I point to the Patco strike, where he fired all the air traffic controllers, and he and Margaret Thatcher really ushered in neoliberalism. They called it, conservatism. It was really what was the beginning of neoliberalism, which is this trickle down, screw over workers, outsource jobs, and if it's good for Wall Street, it's good for America kind of thinking, which coincidentally, ever since that was instituted, the workers in America haven't seen a raise, and all the wealth that has been generated in this economy has gone to the upper 10%, most of it going to the upper 1%, and that our politics, the end result of policy, it's been proven by the Princeton study, has no correlation with 90% of what the electorate wants. There's 90% of what people want, the bottom 90% income earners, their desires are never reflected in legislation, except for the upper 10%, which is completely correctly correlated with how many people in the upper 10% want legislation and what actually gets passed. So we're living in what that is
exactly correct. Yes.
Paul Krugman will openly admit. Paul Krugman, a Clinton supporter, supporter, a rabid Clinton supporter, and Bernie basher will openly admit, which he's done on video, that we live in an oligarchy. Yet his prescription lately to fix it is more oligarchy. So I just wanted you to talk about what did Bill Clinton do to that people don't realize what he did, because what he did was things that Republicans could only dream about. The way that he passed NAFTA, a Republican couldn't. The way he gutted welfare, a Republican couldn't. And the way he exploded the prison population at the same time repealing the New Deal bank regulations, Republicans couldn't do any of these things. It took a Democrat who spoke the words of populism then to go back doors and do those things. And you make the case that Bill Clinton was actually the greater evil in both of his elections. Can you talk about the initial letdown of the American workers by Bill Clinton and the Democrats?
Absolutely. Well, it's because Bill Clinton got things done where a Republican never would, and the things that he got done were profoundly bad. But take a step back here. What you said about Reagan and Thatcher, you're describing I was 15 when Reagan got elected, and I was a little Republican at the time. And then I very soon grew up and figured out what a mistake that was. But you're describing that is the background of my entire adult life, is the neoliberal turn. And this has been going on, and it chugs on, and it goes and goes and goes. And my entire career has been concerned with explaining how this happened and how it keeps going and why we keep voting for it. And What's the Matter with Kansas was one part of that story. And this is the other part. Okay, Bill Clinton is an absolutely essential player in this story. Okay, if you read the books by Clinton's supporters and admirers, they say that he had 5 achievements as president, 5 big achievements. He had a lot of little things. He did all sorts of little things here and there, but he had 5 big things. I'm going to go down the list real quickly. NAFTA is the first one. The crime bill of '94 is the second one. Deregulation of banks, deregulation of telecoms is 3. Welfare reform is 4. And balanced budget is the 5th. Okay? There's 2 things about those achievements. All of them are Republican. Every single one of them is a Republican measure, or in the case of budget balancing, a Republican obsession, or in the case of bank deregulation, this is part of the Republican theology, the theology of free markets. And then the other thing is every single one of these things, with the exception of the balanced budget, every single one of these things ended in disaster. I'd say the balanced budget ended in disaster too, but that's arguable. You can take both sides on that. But the idea of balancing the budget in the teeth of a recession, which Clinton did, when we talk about, and by the way, this gets back to Krugman, who has a very interesting, well, I don't know if it's interesting, but when you talk about the push towards austerity now, when you saw it with Obama and you see it in Europe, these people turning towards austerity in the face as the answer to hard times, and you wonder why they do that. They always have one historical example that they can point back to where it was successful. Clinton. It's this guy. It's like everything goes back to this guy. It's extraordinary. But these are all things that the Republicans wanted, but that they couldn't get. Okay, NAFTA was negotiated by Republicans, but they couldn't pass it. Remember, Congress in those days was controlled by old school Democrats, and they had controlled Congress since the 1930s, almost continuously. And there's no way they were going to pass NAFTA. It took a Democratic president, with Rahm Emanuel at his side, setting up his war room and doing all this stuff and steamrolling these guys to get it done. Okay, and you go over the rest of them, they're all essentially Republican measures where he was trying to like with the crime bill, he was trying to outdo the Republicans. He was going to show that he was even tougher than them, or welfare reform, which was another Republican, it was Republican legislation straight up. I mean, all of these things were. Telecom deregulation, all of them. Anyhow, every single one of them, catastrophe. But this also leads to, you have a huge problem when you make that man's wife your presidential candidate, which is that you can't talk straight about these things. You can't, because you're too afraid of tarnishing the Clinton name, the Clinton wing of the party. You don't want to make them feel bad. And this is, by the way, in my opinion, Hillary Clinton is the only one of the Democrats out there that Trump could have beaten. Trump is a terrible candidate. like the worst presidential candidate we have ever seen. But he had this one issue. He had this one killer issue, trade. It was absolutely, that's where, he's out there turning union rank and file guys against their leadership. He's winning all these rural areas. What the hell is going on? It's because Hillary Clinton is uniquely vulnerable to that issue because of NAFTA. And then additionally, because she's Secretary of State under Obama and negotiating the TPP. And no matter what he says, how she twists and turns and recants and says she changed her mind and has had a change of heart and, and says it in the most convincing way she can, which is not very convincing. No matter what she says, she is stuck with that word NAFTA. And by the way, this is, NAFTA took some time to sink in. People didn't realize, people were against it at the time. But it's only as the years passed and management would use it in contract negotiations with their unions and with labor of all kinds. Be like, if we don't like what you're doing, if we don't, if you complain in the factory, boom, we're moving overseas because of NAFTA. NAFTA lets us do that. It was a weapon that they could use over their workers. And today, when I go around and talk to people, working class people, they hate NAFTA, and they do not forgive Clinton for it. They're still bitter about it. I mean, probably more bitter now than they were at the time. And it's become like...
What do you say to the people? Because I've been on news panels with progressive news hosts who say that people in the Rust Belt have no idea what the TPP is or NAFTA. Nobody voted on that. What do you say to those geniuses?
Well, I don't know about the TPP specifically, but we know how many people voted on the trade issue. It was in the exit polls, and I'm sure we'll be able to dig deeper into it as the time passes and more stuff comes out. But for one thing, this is Trump's number one issue. He talks about it constantly. If you watched his rallies, the whole rally would be about trade, and he'd always come back to it. He'd wander away and talk about something else, but then he would come back to trade. Always comes back to this is the great betrayal. This is when the Democrats slipped the knife between the ribs of their ally, organized labor, and working class people in general. And everybody knows it. And what you just described is something, like I said, I live here in DC, something I encounter all the time. And it's basically the bad conscience of the Democrats. They will not admit this is a real issue. They say, well, they come up with all sorts of, can I say bullshit on your show?
Yes.
They come up with all sorts of bullshit statistics to try to make the trade deals look good. They turn to sort of neoclassical economic theory to insist that trade deals can never do anything wrong. They'll say anything. It's funny that because this is their great betrayal. This is when they turn to their former rank and file of the Democratic Party, the working class of this country, and said, screw you. And for whatever reason, they have never been able to walk that back, and they will. It's psychologically basic. Basically, the reaction that you just described and that I've been seeing all these years here in DC is a psychological reaction. It's not related to facts or reality. It's them trying desperately to rationalize a betrayal that they committed, and that they are in turn committed to, and they will never walk back.
You sound very divisive. Why do you keep pointing out where the Democrats have screwed over unions and stuck a knife into the back of their base? That's very divisive. I don't know why you would do that. Why are you such a purity guy? Did your purity handbook? I'm glad to see your Democratic purity handbook arrive before Christmas, Thomas.